Hello, this is the Global News Podcast from the BBC World Service, with reports and analysis from across the world. The latest news 7 days a week. BBC World Service podcasts are supported by advertising.
What if finding your own voice helped heal a nation?
Look at how, in many ways, African Americans have been at the forefront of moments where the country changed for the better.
Hear a conversation with Smithsonian Secretary Lonnie Bunch on the latest episode of That Made All the Difference, a Bank of America podcast. He discusses his work showcasing the moments that tell the story of all Americans. Find That Made All the Difference wherever you get your podcasts. What would you like the power to do?
This is the Global News Podcast from the BBC World Service. Hello, I'm Oliver Conway, and this edition is published in the early hours of Saturday, the 31st of July. The US Justice Department orders Donald Trump's tax returns to be handed to Congress. The World Health Organization says the unequal distribution of COVID vaccines is putting hard-won gains at risk. And Israel's foreign minister blames Iran for an attack on an oil tanker and calls for a harsh response. Also in the podcast, China suffers its most extensive COVID outbreak since Wuhan. New research shows the Delta variant could be more dangerous for pregnant women and their babies.
With the Alpha variant in the UK, about 1 in 10 women who were admitted to hospital with symptoms of COVID needed intensive care. We now know with the Delta variant, that's about 1 in 7 women. And we also know that for those women, about 1 in 5 will have a premature birth.
And as Israel prepares to roll out booster jabs for the over 60s, some won't have the vaccine at all.
Seeing people that are refusing to get vaccinated, not listening to sound science that's really showing the benefits of it, has been very difficult. Because, we're fighting one war. It's like swimming against the current all the time, and then the current just keeps pushing you backwards.
For decades, US presidents have allowed their tax returns to be opened up to scrutiny. But Donald Trump was not a big fan of such traditions and refused to release the information, saying his tax returns were under audit. Now, the Justice Department has performed a U-turn and ordered them to be handed over to the US Congress. I heard more from our correspondent, David Willis.
Donald Trump's tax returns, of course, have long been a subject of immense fascination, and not least because of his bitter resistance to divulging them. Indeed, the former president has fought, tooth and nail through the courts to avoid having to release his returns. But whereas when he was in power, he had the backing of the US Justice Department, the department under the Biden administration has now upheld a request by a congressional committee, the House Ways and Means Committee for the Treasury and the US Tax Office, to be compelled to release 6 years of Mr. Trump's tax returns. That committee has been investigating whether Donald Trump complied with the nation's tax laws. Does this mean that his returns are about to be made public? I think that seems unlikely anytime soon. Donald Trump is expected to challenge the Justice Department's decision in court, and assuming that they do get access to the returns, then the committee members would then have to vote on whether that information could be shared, both amongst their congressional colleagues and indeed amongst the wider public.
Nevertheless, this was a second blow for Donald Trump in a matter of hours.
That's right. According to documents provided to lawmakers and obtained by US media outlets, the former president put pressure on senior officials at the US Justice Department to declare last year's election corrupt, even though they had found no evidence of widespread fraud. That's all part of his effort, of course, to have the election overturned. This is based on a phone call last December between the former president and the acting Attorney General, a man by the name of Jeffrey Rosen, and his deputy, Richard Donoghue. Now, according to notes taken by Mr. Donoghue, Donald Trump said, "Just say the election was corrupt and leave the rest to me." But those two officials pushed back, saying there was no evidence of voter fraud and asserting that there was nothing that the Justice Department can actually do to change the outcome of the 2020 election.
David Willis. The head of the World Health Organization has said the world risks losing any gains it's made against COVID-19. Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus said the emergence of new variants and the failure to share vaccines meant countries were now seeing a resurgence of the virus. Imogen Foulkes reports.
In Africa, just 1.5% of people have been vaccinated. Over the last 4 weeks, COVID deaths there have gone up 80%. These figures should be unacceptable, the WHO said. The Delta variant spreads faster than the original variants. While it does not appear to have a higher death rate or to resist the vaccines, that's little comfort to countries where the very people most at risk have no chance to be vaccinated, or to health systems struggling to cope.
Imogen Foulkes. China is suffering from what's been described as its worst COVID contagion since Wuhan. A cluster of Delta variant infections has now spread to 5 Chinese provinces. More than 200 people have tested positive in the southern city of Nanjing, and related cases have popped up in 13 other cities, including the capital Beijing. Professor Yang Jun Huang is a senior fellow for global health at the Washington-based Council on Foreign Relations. He told my colleague Julian Marshall what's known about how this latest outbreak started.
It began in Nanjing when 7 airport cleaning workers were identified to be infected with COVID.
At the last count, some 200 people were known to have been infected. Do we know whether or not they were vaccinated?
My understanding, or it is said, that most of those infected people actually have been vaccinated.
You're speaking about breakthrough infection here, people who have been vaccinated but nonetheless contracted the Delta variant of the virus. So what does that tell us, therefore, about the efficacy of Chinese-made vaccines?
It clearly shows that the efficacy of the vaccine is in decline, when you're dealing with such a highly transmissible virus strain. It was said that 80% of those infections had the first jab, and 60% had been fully vaccinated. Among those 171 people who were infected by July 28th, I believe, 86 are defined as so-called ordinary cases. But we know, right, in China, but essentially those ordinary cases defined here in the U.S., for example, also as severe cases. So if you add up, right, essentially, right, the 93 are severe cases by U.S. standards. So that shows the drop of efficacy of the vaccine dealing with severe cases.
The statistics that you're giving me coming out of China in this latest outbreak, are they borne out elsewhere in East Asia where the Chinese vaccines have been used?
Even based on this data, right, in China, the sample, the size remains very small for us to draw a conclusion, right, on the actual efficacy of the Chinese vaccines. Chile, right, they did have this real world, right, this study that showed, the Sinovac vaccine remained effective, especially in dealing with severe cases. But again, the most recent data was in May. That means its effectiveness against the Delta variant remains unclear.
How confident are you that the Chinese authorities are going to be able to contain this latest outbreak?
The leading Chinese public health experts pointed out that the future 1 to 2 months would be the most critical. More than 20,000 the airport workers, and their family members have been bussed over to designated hotels to be quarantined or isolated. And this de facto lockdown has been imposed on Nanjing. The city has experienced 3 rounds of nuclear acid tests. So it is very clear the government has doubled down on containment measures, although to what extent, that will be effective, remains to be seen.
Professor Yang Jun Huang. And staying with COVID, new research by the University of Oxford here in the UK shows an alarming increase in unvaccinated pregnant women getting severe COVID-19. It's thought the Delta variant could be more dangerous for pregnant women and their babies than other variants, so they're now being urged to get the jab. Marion Knight is one of the authors of the report and Professor of Maternal and Child Population Health at Oxford University.
We've just undertaken some new research and we found that with the Delta variant, it appears that pregnant women are more severely affected. So whereas with the Alpha variant in the UK, about 1 in 10 women who were admitted to hospital with symptoms of COVID needed intensive care. We now know with the Delta variant, that's about 1 in 7 women. And we also know that for those women, about 1 in 5 will have a premature birth.
And why do we think pregnant women are so vulnerable to this particular variant? Even if they're quite young, they seem to be more susceptible.
It's difficult to know exactly, but we do know that simply because you're pregnant, it can affect your breathing. We also know that you can't be nursed in a prone position, lying on your tummy, which we know has been good for nursing people with severe COVID. It is possible, because we know that this variant is particularly going round in younger people, younger adults, that pregnant women are getting a higher dose of the variant, which might be what's making their illness worse.
You mentioned there the fact that some women that get this particular strain may end up having premature babies. What are the difficulties with those?
We know that babies born prematurely, for example, have more neurodevelopmental problems. We know that babies born even only a few weeks prematurely can have more problems at school.
So, Professor, for quite a while there wasn't very much detail, not much research done on how the vaccine may affect pregnant women. We do know a bit more about that now, don't we? Because there was a time when pregnant women were not being offered the vaccine, but that's changed.
Exactly so. So the really good news that we know from the research we've just done is that the majority of the women, in fact 98% of women who are being admitted to hospital with symptoms of COVID in pregnancy and getting severe infection, have not been vaccinated. So that means that we know that in the real world that the vaccine is working. In the UK and the US, we know now that more than 200,000 women have had a vaccine in pregnancy. We have no concerning safety signals from those women. So although pregnant women were not included in the original vaccine trials, we now have very good real-world evidence about the vaccine safety.
So what would you say to pregnant women then? Because, I mean, many are reluctant even to take things like paracetamol or very sort of normal medication at all. Lots of pregnant women just avoid everything, don't they? And they may be quite worried about the impact of the jab and how it may affect the baby and the growing fetus. What would you say to pregnant women listening now?
There's absolutely no doubt in my mind that the risks of COVID are much, much greater than any potential risks of taking the vaccine. And actually, when thinking about the vaccine, we've got to think about the benefits. We know that from the research we've just done, we know that it's protecting you as a pregnant mum against getting severe COVID. It will protect your baby from being born prematurely as a consequence. We also know that antibodies are passed on from mum to baby. And it's not a live vaccine, so we know there's no concerns about infection in the baby. You know, in that way, it's very similar to the flu vaccine and the whooping cough vaccine, which we've been using safely in pregnancy for many years. And they very clearly protect the babies from getting infections.
Professor Marion Knight talking to Rebecca Kesby. Meanwhile, Israel has become the first country in the world to start rolling out a third COVID vaccination or booster jab for those aged over 60. The Israeli president, Isaac Herzog, kicked off the new campaign by receiving his third jab alongside his wife. He said it was an important step for social solidarity in Israel.
we are beginning the booster vaccination, which is so vital to enable normal circumstances of life as much as possible in this very challenging pandemic which society and humanity is faced with. With this new step of the Israeli government, which I'm proud as the President of the State of Israel to launch, I believe that it's also a lesson to the entire humankind that we have to protect each other and take the necessary steps to make sure that we can all function as normal and ordinary states and societies.
Well, the Israeli Prime Minister Naftali Bennett has said that people who avoid vaccines are endangering the country, and he plans to make people who refuse the jab pay for tests to be able to go to big events. Israel had the world's fastest vaccine rollout. About 60% of the population is jabbed. But now the Delta variant has led to a resurgence of the virus. So will these new measures motivate the young to get immunised? Here's our Middle East correspondent, Tom Bateman.
For months, Israel's been unlocked and unwinding.
How's it going?
I've come to a beach bar in Tel Aviv. And here's Liran. He's 33, and he says he doesn't want to be told what to do.
So have you had the vaccine?
No, I didn't do the vaccine.
Why not?
I believe in, how it's called, freedom personal, yeah?
Personal freedom.
Personal freedom, yeah. In this issue of the corona, it didn't connect me. I feel like they're just trying to make me afraid, or trying to give me something like, you do that, we will give you to fly to other country. You will do that, we will give you to go to the clubs.
Israel's vaccine hesitancy is mostly among the young. The state worries the early success of its vaccine rollout could be washed away in a tide of rising infections.
אין שום סיבה שמשלמי המיסים ואנשים שכן מקיימים את חובתם.
So the Prime Minister Naftali Bennett got angry, saying jab avoiders were endangering the country.
שהחל מה-8 באוגוסט סרבן חיסון לא יוכל
There'll be no entry to cinemas and the football, he says, other places with more than 100 people for those who haven't had the vaccine or a negative test result. And he promised that vaccine avoiders, not the taxpayers, will foot the bill for their tests.
יממנו בדיקות למי שמסרב להתחסן.
A doctor embraces his colleague. People here are hugging again. I've come to a clinic at Maccabi, one of the big health providers. Dr. Roni Sharon still hopes the vaccines will end a devastating time.
Working 12, 14 hours a day, my wife being pregnant, so at the height of everything when nobody was vaccinated, not wanting to go home to her, it takes its toll. Now, at the same time, seeing people that are refusing to get vaccinated, not listening to sound science that's really showing the benefits of it, has been very difficult. Because, we're fighting one war. It's like swimming against the current all the time, and then the current just keeps pushing you backwards.
As they call in more patients, I chat with Idor Hadari from the Health Trust. Around a fifth of Israelis aged 20 to 40 are still not vaccinated, and the figure is far lower for teenagers who are eligible.
We succeeded with, let's say, 80% of the adult population. Usually you achieve herd immunization with 80%. But since in Israel there are many kids, we didn't achieve yet herd immunization. That means that the next person who is not vaccinated is really putting me at risk.
Over at a city market, a few more signs of skepticism. I bump into Hassan and his daughter Kamer, among a minority of West Bank Palestinians vaccinated by Israel as they have work permits. Before her jab, Kamer had the virus.
And you recovered. And what was it like? How did you feel when you had COVID?
It's like the influenza, the flu. Yeah, the flu, like the flu.
The belief that if you're younger, you're safer is a factor in people skipping jabs, say doctors. But I also sense something else. People feeling an industry growing around the pandemic, and so is their cynicism.
My city, Kalkilia, we did corona test, 150 shekel. We go to Jordan, we have a corona test. Oh no, 30 Jordan dinar. Corona test money. Why?
How much?
Jordan, I told them, don't come near my nose. Don't. It's a game.
Pandemic weariness happens in the beach bars and market. In the hospital wards, the number of seriously ill, although relatively low, is rising. Some hesitate over the vaccine, but when it comes to the current case surge, Israel is holding its breath.
Our Middle East correspondent Tom Bateman reporting. And still to come in the podcast.
It's a really interesting case in terms of how streaming has totally changed the economics of the movie industry.
Scarlett Johansson sues Disney over the streaming of Black Widow. For years, Israel and Iran have been engaged in a so-called shadow war, carrying out small-scale attacks while stopping short of anything that might trigger all-out conflict. In April, Iran blamed Israel for sabotaging a nuclear site and said it would retaliate. Now, Israel has accused Iran of launching a drone strike on an Israeli-operated oil tanker off the coast of Oman. 2 crew members, one British, one Romanian, were killed. The Israeli Foreign Minister, Yair Lapid, said Iran was an exporter of terrorism, destruction and instability, and a tough response was needed. Our security correspondent Frank Gardner has more details.
What we know for certain is the date, the time, the location of the attack and the damage in human terms, which is that this vessel was sailing from Dar es Salaam in Tanzania to Fujairah, the port on the Arabian Sea side of the Emirati coast, when it was attacked late in the afternoon on Thursday, and 2 crew members were killed, a Briton and a Romanian. And it wasn't carrying any cargo at the time. It was subsequently escorted by the US Navy to a safe port. Now, the initial assessment was that it was an act of piracy, but subsequently it doesn't look like that, I have to say. The suspicion is that it was some kind of state-backed actor, and Israeli TV is quoting an unnamed Israeli official saying that it was attacked by an Iranian explosive drone. And certainly it's quite a big escalation for people to be killed in one of these attacks. There have been a number of mysterious explosions on both Israeli-owned and Iranian-owned ships in the region. And this ship, by the way, it's Japanese-owned, but it's managed by an Israeli-owned company. So the suspicion, although nothing is proven yet, the suspicion is falling on Iran. And there is this sort of I would call it a lukewarm war between them. It's not a Cold War, it's more than that, but it's not open hostilities. They are both stopping short of a point at which they would actually start to incur major casualties on each other. But this is certainly an escalation with 2 people being killed, and it may well be that that wasn't the intention.
Our security correspondent Frank Gardner. The security forces in Tunisia are reported to have arrested a member of parliament who's accused President Kais Saied of carrying out a coup. Yassine Ayari represents a small party in parliament. He made his name as a blogger criticising politicians, including Mr Saied. Mutia Ayari is the brother of the arrested MP. He spoke to my colleague Julian Marshall.
What happened at the house, basically, there is like more than 20 or 30 different cars. They came to our house and they entered the house without saying basically anything about why they are here and why what they need and who sent them. And when Yassine, my brother, showed up, they conducted him by force into the car, and then they went. And we don't really know who sent them. It was very scared moment for all my family. And then we contacted basically journalists, we contacted the lawyers and the organization and so on to know at least to what happened and why they did this. We are basically heading straight away to the new dictatorship after this. And this case cast a ominous light on the prospects for freedom of expression.
You speak of freedom of expression. Your brother was he not a critic of President Kais Saied and also the army, was he not?
Well, freedom of expression is the only benefits of the revolution. And today, my brother, in the past few days after Kai Said's coup, he published a series of states on Facebook. And we honestly think that this is why they want to take him from the home, basically. The real reason, I would say, that after Kai Said through the parliament, dismissed the prime minister and announced that he will temporarily rule by decree, my brother Yassin published a series of status on Facebook and in his blog.
What did he say?
He said that basically it's a coup done by Kai Said. Kai Said will try to intimidate anyone who tries to speak up. And you see that he started by my brother.
Why is it that the Arab world seems to be polarised between Islamist parties such as Ennahda in Tunisia and autocratic, often secular rulers like Kai Said? Why do you think that is?
Well, I think it's not about Islamism, and I think it's bigger than that. This case of my brother casts an ominous light on the prospect for freedom of expression now. And as I mentioned, freedom of expression is the only benefits of the revolution. And I think, honestly, that we are heading now to a new dictatorship under Kai Said. It's not, I don't think that it's between Nahda, Islamist, and Kai Said, but between the Arab Spring Revolution and who are against the Arab Spring Revolution. I think Kai Said, and what he said and what he did, he was supported by Egypt, basically, and by Emirates, and those two countries are against the Arab Spring revolts. I'm not saying that Nahda was a good party in government, and I confirm that the government was very bad and was very poor government, very poor parliament. That's correct. But now they are using this to stop the Arab Spring Revolution. So Kai Said is using this poor performance of the government and the poor performance of the parliament. But the aim after that, I think that it will, the idea behind is that to intimidate anyone who tries to speak up, he will take all the power and we will return back to the dictatorship.
Moutia Ayari, brother of the arrested Tunisian MP Yassin Ayari. Tunisia's president, Kais Saied, said in response to his critics, there will be no dictator. Even for the woman once said to be the richest in Africa, $500 million is a lot. That's the value of oil and gas shares the former first daughter of Angola, Isabel dos Santos, has been ordered to hand back by an international court of arbitration. It said the way she got the shares was illegal. Ms. dos Santos has faced a series of allegations that she plundered state assets during her father's many years in power. Speaking to the BBC last year, she denied any wrongdoing.
Well, these are false allegations, and this is part of an orchestrated attack by the current government that is completely politically motivated. It's completely unfounded. My holdings are commercial. There are no proceeds from contracts or public contracts or money that has been deviated from public funds.
Jonathan Savage explained more about the court ruling.
Well, there's a very long and complex paper trail, Oliver, but the upshot of it was that Isabel dos Santos had a 6% shareholding in a Portuguese energy group called Galp, but the transaction by which she acquired those shares in 2006 has been declared null and void. According to the International Court of Arbitration, the sales contract said that she should have paid it in euros, but in fact paid for it in Angola's local currency, and underlying all this are accusations that she diverted billions of dollars from state companies during her father's near 40-year rule as president. And the court has ordered Ms. dos Santos to return the shares to Angola's state energy company, Sonangol, that company that she used to run until her dad left office.
And how has this news gone down in Angola?
Well, for those who believe that Isabel dos Santos is corrupt, it's a victory. One of Sonangol's lawyers said the arbitration court has judged that she enriched herself with money stolen from Angolan people. According to them, the judges said the acquisition of the stake was tainted by illegality and enabling Mr. Santos to reap extraordinary financial gain to the detriment of the state of Angola. Now, of course, as we say, she's consistently denied any wrongdoing, denounced accusations as a politically motivated witch hunt.
Nevertheless, it underlines how far she's fallen.
Yeah, she was worth an estimated $3.5 billion at one point. Now, she's still clearly very wealthy, but the root of her money and her power was her father's presidency. Isabel dos Santos was even nicknamed the Princess. When her dad left office, her business assets were frozen. There were accusations of plundering the public purse, funneling money abroad. And of course, Angola is oil-rich but impoverished, and a lot of people look at the dos Santos family and wonder how it could be the case. Now, her argument, of course, is that it's all a groundless political vendetta.
Jonathan Savage. The Hollywood star Scarlett Johansson is suing Disney for breach of contract after it streamed her superhero film Black Widow at the same time as its cinema release.
You don't know everything about me. I've lived a lot of lives. Before I was an Avenger. Before I got this family. I made mistakes choosing between what the world wants you to be and who you are.
The movie set a box office record for the COVID-19 pandemic, earning nearly $220 million on its opening weekend. But then box office receipts fell sharply, which, according to her lawsuit, meant Miss Johansson had lost out on potential earnings. Disney says her case is without merit, so who's right? Anna Nicolaou is a US media correspondent for the Financial Times.
If you read through the lawsuit, it really kind of comes down to the wording. She'd struck this deal with them originally in 2017, so well before COVID, well before Disney Plus had even launched. The original contract guarantees a wide theatrical release. It does not say specifically that it has to be exclusively in cinemas. But the one thing that she does have going for her pretty strongly is that in 2019, when Disney was announcing its big plans for streaming, she had followed up with them expressing concern that they would not do a traditional big cinema release. And they received a pretty explicit email from the Marvel chief counsel basically saying, we're going to do this like we've done other movies. And the wording definitely strongly implies that it will be, a traditional release, which for Hollywood has meant up until this year, essentially, that you wait at least 90 days before putting a movie online like this. It's a really interesting case, honestly, just in terms of how streaming has totally changed the economics of the movie industry.
Anna Nicolaou, US media correspondent for the Financial Times. And that's all from us for now, but we'll be back soon. If you want to comment on this podcast, you can send an email to globalpodcast@bbc.co.uk. This edition was produced by Farhana Dawood and mixed by Nicola Bruff. I'm Oliver Conway. Until next time, goodbye.
You decided to upgrade your outdoor deck, so you ordered the essentials, a power washer, a set of patio chairs, and a shiny new grill. And you used your Bank of America customized Cash Rewards credit card, choosing to earn 3% cash back on online shopping and up to 5.25% as a preferred rewards member, which you put towards your most essential deck addition, a bird feeder. Apply for yours at bankofamerica.com/more rewarding. Copyright 2021 Bank of America Corporation.